it is going to be it's going to be revealed in at COP30 in Brazil in November.
Oh, okay.
And we've got a team of scientists and financial people and technologists uh, and uh, and investors that are looking at this from every angle. And it is a an alternative to current carbon credits called an SFT, and we're going to be having our first SFT conference in Quito in March. Uh, and it's the dream that we've all been having for years of how to support the last billion acres of tropical forest.
Wow, wow. Is that with regeneration, with regen?
No, it's would be complementary to or ancillary to.
Ah, okay, okay.
Yeah, but I'd love to share more with you on that in a future date.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely fantastic. Yeah.
Well, I see some familiar faces popping up. Al, it is always super great to see you. Thank you so much for being here. And Mary and Marcy and Lindsay and Drew. This is Drew's first call. Excellent. Drew's also a GIS expert. On my screen, you'll see Owen, who's today's presenter. I'm going to kill a few minutes until we get some more people, and then we'll begin with a meditation and then an introduction, and then we'll get going right into today. What a lovely screen in front of me. Yeah. I will say that some people wrote me after Baylin's talk, and after the word got out that Fundación Pachamama's accounts had been frozen by Ecuador, Al wrote and a couple others wrote and said, "Is there any way to financially support Baylin or Fundación?" And I just got a text from Baylin a couple days ago with all her personal banking information, like her account number and her uh, uh, whatever the rest of the banking numbers are. So it was a little strange because I don't imagine people making direct deposits down to Ecuador, but I might talk to her about some other ways that that could happen. But for those of you who wanted to support Belin and things with Fundación Pachamama during the difficulty there, I can you can reach out to me individually, and I'll let you know what I can know or what I do know. All right, people are showing up on time. Excellent. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Seeing lots of familiar faces and fresh faces and unknown faces. Lovely. So, as usual, we like to start close to on time. So, as people arrive, we're going to already be in the meditation. So, in whatever position you want to put yourself in, with your feet on the floor or eyes closed, this will be a brief guided meditation to move us to a place where we're ready to receive, ready to bring our best selves. So why don't you start on your own by taking 2 or 3 deep breaths, such that your chest expands and your shoulders move.
Hey.
And in your mind's eye, imagine field, a galactic field that is endless darkness, endless black. Of course, there's the twinkle of stars in the distance. But at one place, you see this one twinkle, and as you look at it more closely and cast your gaze upon it, you see that it has a blue hue. And as such, you move toward it. And now this blue light starts to grow in that field of blackness. And as it comes closer and closer, the beauty of it is extraordinary, both in contrast and in its sovereign illumination. And as you get closer to it with each breath, you see that blue grow. And now you start to see some other colors. You start to see some white. and you start to see some brown, and you start to see some reds. And with the next breath, it becomes closer. And now you see this is a beautiful, diverse globe floating in this vast, limitless sea of darkness. And now you can see swirls of storms over oceans. And you see brilliant white caps of ice at the poles. And you see vast amount of gorgeous blues and turquoise around edges. And you see the reds of deserts and the greens of forests and the white tops of mountain ranges. And it's one of the most beautiful things you can see. And you could wonder, is this the only place like this in the sea of darkness? Or are there millions? And it's a rhetorical question, of course. And as you get closer, now this orb is in front of you and it's dominating the whole vision in your mind's eye. And imagine your arms coming out of your shoulder sockets and reaching around the equator. And with each breath, your arms reach a little bit further and a little bit further and a little bit further until your fingers almost touch on the far side, beyond the Terminator, beyond your vision. Your fingers are almost touching, like the image on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. And this is you wrapping your arms around this planet Earth that we are not separate from, that we are birthed of and participating with, and have always been here and will always be here. And feel the love that you are giving to this planet, and feel the love that the planet is giving back to you. It is a congruence, it is a coherence, it is known by not so many, yet felt by all. And with the next few breaths, let your hands start to separate and retreat back into your shoulders. And let the planet Earth start to recede in your mind's eye. With every breath, smaller and smaller and smaller still, until it takes its place among the other trillions of light sources in the field of darkness. And with the next breath, invite yourself to bring your best self to our time together, your best listening, your best thinking, your best feeling and intuiting. And then if your eyes are closed, cast your eyes upon your screen and see the other people that are present on this call. And I will take a moment to introduce today's presenter. Welcome, everyone. Hi, Vikram. Hi, David. Excellent. Hola, Lindsay. Hola, Cynthia. Thanks for being here. Andro, ¿cómo está, amigo? Uh, Isabella, Alex, Teal, thank you, dear. So you may say on your screen, Owen Gaffney. Been very excited for today's gathering. Owen and I met a couple of years ago in Ecuador on a trip that Vikram was on also. And I learned that someone from the Nobel Institute was coming and going to join us on this trip. And I was so excited because a few months before, the Nobel Prize in Physics had been awarded to a trio of scientists who had concluded through quantum entanglement that there's no such thing as local reality. And some of you are familiar with that concept, and some of you wonder what the hell that's supposed to mean, and I'm not going to go into the details. But Owen's flight had been delayed and it got mixed up. And then all of a sudden he showed up at this dinner table on the edge of the Amazon. And I looked down and I saw him 20 feet away and I thought, oh, I can't wait to meet this guy. And I thought, tomorrow I'm going to engage him about quantum entanglement and non-local reality or local reality. And 90 seconds later, I couldn't wait any longer. Vikram's laughing because I think he saw it happen. And I got up and I walked down the table and I pulled out a chair and sat down next to him and I said, oh my God, I was awake at 3 in the morning when you guys gave the award to physics for the cadre of people that had concluded there was no such thing as local reality. And I was so excited and there was no one to call. And now to have you here on this trip is so exciting. And he just looked at me and said, well, I didn't expect to get in this conversation upon sitting at dinner. And it ended up being a trip that we spent together in the Amazon. Then he came up to Makipakuna, which some of you have been to. And he's just one of the most agile, considerate, ethical, epistemological minds I've ever been around. And my enthusiasm and my appreciation and my intrigue was just absolutely lit up. And so for all of you who are here, for all of you who are taking the time out of your day, big appreciation for you being here. And this is just the beginning of the stories that are going to come from each of our calls and this one in particular. So with that, I will pass it over to Owen Gaffney, who is calling us from his home in Stockholm, Sweden. As we speak, his window will grow dark in the background because night is falling there, as many of us are just getting up. And as usual, about 45 minutes into it, Rich will break us into groups of threes. And we'll go 2 or 3 minutes this time. We're thinking of making it a little bit longer for each person to have a chance to come up with their questions and their observations and revelations. And then we'll come back as a group and we'll join all together and complete the call. So with that, here is Owen Gaffney.
Hey, hi Chris. What an introduction. Thank you so much, and great to see you again, Vikram. Yeah, and it's just wonderful to thank you for the invitation to come and speak. You know, the that trip was organised by Anna and Per Espen Stoknes, and you know, Per Espen spoke maybe a few weeks ago here. So and I was very inspired by his talk too, and that was just such an incredible trip. I think both of you I met within minutes of then joining you all in on the edge of the Amazon, and then I remember with Vikram we were myself and Vikram were I think waiting. We were in one of there was a sort of both two small planes, and you know, one was smaller than the other. I think it was just three people in the second plane, and myself and Vikram were two of them, and we were waiting in the rain, the pouring rain, waiting for the rain to stop, and then you know, where time actually doesn't matter anymore. Actually, you know, our sort of modern conception of time and like everything, you know, when will it, when you know, running to clockwork, etc. It goes out the window. All that matters is what's happening with the biosphere at that moment in your locality, and that determines what happens. And so we were just waiting for the rain to stop and had some really good conversations there. And you're right. I mean, and I didn't expect to have these this you know, we're talking about entanglement straight away, straight in there. And I was going, oh, okay, this is brilliant. And by some maybe it is entanglement again that we're sitting here today talking. With the Nobel Physics Prize has just been announced today, and three academics then were awarded the prize today again for a quantum discovery for quantum tunneling in the 80s. That is now leading to the designs of quantum computing. So it's a big week here with the Nobel Prize. This is the biggest week of the year with the announcements, the Medicine Prize yesterday, and then chemistry, literature, and peace, and then economics on Monday. So um, it's a big week. I'm not here today representing the Nobel Prize. I'm Chief Impact Officer there, but I also have several other hats. I co-chair and several organizations, and I co-founded several more. And myself and Per Espin, we co-founded the Earth for All project, where we published a book a few years ago called Earth for All: The Survival Guide for Humanity. And the project now it's a big international project with a lot of work. And I think what I'll speak about today is maybe some of that work within Earth for All. And I'm going to speak particularly about the one thing that's been really interesting me, engaging me over the last year or so, is the idea of a common humanity. Because it seems to me that one of the things that is maybe the big thing that's missing. We have a lot of challenges in the world, um, and but why aren't we making progress on those challenges? And I get a sense that we don't have a sense of a common humanity, and why is that? Why might that be? And what is the foundation of a common humanity? It's trust. How do we have trust at this global scale to move to work collectively together? So I want to really talk about that and some of the ideas around common humanity and building trust in societies and at scale. But maybe I'll start actually building on your meditation, Chris, with just a simple breathing exercise. So I ask everybody to take a deep breath in and hold and breathe out. And then take another deep breath in. And this time, as you're breathing in, give thanks to the forests and the oceans, the phytoplankton in the oceans that give us oxygen, that give us the oxygen we breathe. Breathe in again and then out again, and think about the biosphere, the oxygen coming from phytoplankton, coming from the forests, and this great oxidation event that happened 2.5 billion years ago, that created this evolution of species that can release oxygen, and this was one of the biggest events in human history. And as you breathe out, give thanks again to the forests and oceans for drawing down the carbon. That we're all carbon, we're all part of the carbon cycle, and the forests and oceans lock away that carbon, and keep us in in an equilibrium state in this dynamic biosphere. So that's my kind of Earth system meditation, to start us off. Because for 20 years I've been working in Earth system science, how these things are all connected, and what that means. And now that we are the humanity is the largest driver of change in the Earth system. We say we've entered the Anthropocene. And what does that mean? That, very practically, the great oxidation event was one of the most profound events in the history of this planet. Actually, the advent of humanity and what we have done to the planet over the last 80 years is equivalent on a scale of profoundness as the great oxidation event or the Cambrian explosion 500, 600 million years ago, 550. Also, these huge events, and this is what's happening right now. In our generation, we are equivalent to that kind of event. We're a shock to the system. We're a rupture to the Earth system. And what does that mean? I mean, and that's emergent behavior. That's not collective behavior that's happened. That's an emergent behavior that's driven that. And now we need to think about our common humanity as a responsibility for the biosphere, responsibility for future generations. And what kind of institutions do we have for a common humanity? You know, economic institutions, technological, political institutions. Well, if you look, we have many institutions and systems, but many of those systems actually work in the opposite way to creating a common humanity. They're sort of pulling it apart. They're pushing us in away from that. And you know, I grew up in Northern Ireland in the 1980s, and I was born in the Republic of Ireland. Then we moved to England, and then we moved back to, but this time to Northern Ireland, and spent the 80s. You know, at the height of this civil war, this terrorist bombings day in, day out. And we had this, you know, there was no common humanity there. There was, you know, very minor religious differences and very profound different national identities were pulling that community apart. And I must admit, I couldn't get out of there fast enough. You know, all my schooling was focused on getting enough points to get into a university outside of Northern Ireland. There was no economic opportunities. It was intellectually stifling. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. And I actually had no sort of optimism that anything could ever change there. I just saw this was like a place that would always be like this. I mean, there was just didn't seem to be any way out. And now we see, you know, a generation later, we could never go back to that fighting. I think it's like a completely different world. They've turned the corner. Communities are working together, and it's a totally different environment. And that's and actually recognized by a Nobel Peace Prize several times throughout the sort of history of the Troubles in Northern Ireland. But it does show that, you know, it is possible to bring about change in a very profound way, but it can go either way. Um, but the most urgent issue we have with a common humanity is then sort of dealing with this Anthropocene, you know, how we show up in the Anthropocene. We are changing the biosphere. I spent a lot of time looking at how the scale we're changing it. 20 years ago, back in 2005, I joined the research ship, the Charles Darwin, and we were sailing across the Atlantic Ocean from Africa to Miami to Florida at 26 degrees, and this was a historic research trip. We were there to collect the first array of scientific instruments that had been put into the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean all the way across the Atlantic to measure the overturning circulation, the famous Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, kind of linked to the Gulf Stream, but the Gulf Stream is a wind-driven surface current, and the AMOC, the Atlantic circulation, is salinity-driven, and it's much bigger, and it pulls heat. Most of the heat from the sun just hits the equator, and it would just stay there unless you have these circulations pulling it north and south and distributing it around the planet. So we were there sailing across, doing this like month-long journey to release these instruments that had been locked away at the bottom of the ocean for a year, and you like set off a device that will send a signal, you know, 3-4 kilometers down to the bottom and tell the thing to release. And then at some point, a few minutes later, something will pop to the surface somewhere around where we were. And it took us ages to find it. Everybody's got binoculars out, and then suddenly you see a yellow buoy and go, right, great. And then we'd bring it on board the ship with fish hooks and everything. And this had this priceless data in it. For the first time, we'd have like an annual, well, actually not annual, actually, you know, daily readings of the scale of the flow, and so that's been collected, and now we have like you know, 20 years of unprecedented detailed reports on it, and we're now able to get some paleo data sort of, and data going back further in time as well from proxies, and we can see that actually it's slowing down severely. the AMOC in an alarming way. We were there's a small probability that it could reach a tipping point within a few decades. 15, 20 years ago, when we were on board the ship, the PI, the principal investigator, was saying, this is a dour Scot called Stuart Cunningham. Uh, he was saying, "Oh, we're tickling the tail of a dragon." He was using the Richard Feynman quote about nuclear, about you splitting the atom. We're tickling the tail of the dragon here. But even then, we all thought that this was many decades into the future, maybe towards the end of the century. And now here we are in this situation where we're seriously talking about, the risks of collapse, which would, put Northern Europe into very, very cold extremes, particularly in winter. Some of the models show ice sheets or sea ice, sorry, coming down to Scotland, and and even more profoundly, it would have huge effects on food security worldwide as the temperatures, as the heat from the sun doesn't get distributed, and big impacts for the Amazon rainforest, etc. And of course, the second tipping point I can talk about is the Amazon. I've been there multiple times now. The last time with Vikram and Chris, and it's going through sort of severe droughts, huge changes that, and then through deforestation, it's lost 17, 18% of the forest. And we know that these things combined, the deforestation plus the rising temperatures, we're just reducing its resilience, and it could cross a tipping point and move to more like a savanna state. If temperatures keep rising and if deforestation reaches approximately 20%, according to Carlos Nobre, dear friend and brilliant Brazilian Earth system scientist. So there's many more tipping points. Some of my work has been looking at sort of the synthesis of these tipping points, the West Antarctic ice sheet and Greenland ice sheet, and we can see that they're undergoing profound change as well. So within the range of the Paris Agreement, 1.5 to 2 degrees, we could cross some of these tipping points. So this is the urgency. This is like we have to act far, far faster than we are. We know what we need to do, but there's still time to act to do it. We still have time to drastically reduce emissions, and this gets me to I'm generally sort of an optimistic person by outlook and by design, and by just I guess sort of maybe you're just born with that kind of optimism. And I just want to talk a little bit about optimism too, because I think optimism is an important part of actually solving some of these problems. I'm optimistic for multiple reasons. Number one, we still have time to act. That's the first thing we should be aware of. Secondly, I have two sons, 16 and 19. I mean, I have a moral responsibility to be optimistic for their future and the future of all children, that they will have a planet to live on that is and societies to live on that are good. They will have to deal with a lot. They'll have to deal with a lot more than we've had to deal with in terms of the stability of the planet. But we can still be optimistic that we can build a good future for humanity. And second, thirdly, we've come so far. We now have, as the Nobel Prizes show, for 125 years, it's an interesting sort of history of human progress. But when it comes to longevity, when it comes to education, when it comes to solving diseases, when it comes to feeding populations and avoiding plagues and famines, we know we have the we have the solutions to deal with them. For all the key things that we've had huge throughout history have plagued us, poverty, hunger, disease. We know how to solve now. We can say with a reasonably serious face that we know how to solve them. And we know how to run an economy on clean energy, on wind and solar, and even hard to abate sectors like steel and cement. So, I mean, this should be a very empowering time. This should be the best time to live, right? Because we have all these solutions, and now we need to implement them. And another reason for optimism is that the future is created by optimists. So Dan Kahneman, he was awarded the Nobel Prize for his work in behavioral psychology. He was famously very optimistic person, and he pointed out, well, if you it's scientists, it's engineers, it's entrepreneurs are generally optimistic in outlook and believe that they can create the future. And so his sort of tongue-in-cheek paraphrasing was that the future is created by optimists. I think there's an element of truth in that, and there's also an element of truth in that optimists are happier than pessimists. So for that reason alone, we should be more optimistic. And also, I think coming back maybe to the common humanity, another foundation for optimism should be that humans are basically good. I mean, I think given the right conditions, we try to do the right thing, and we should have that as a kind of baseline assumption. How do we create the right conditions to do that? And in terms of how strangers respond to disasters, and in places, how we can self-organize, how we how we carry ourselves in the world. Many of the times, and we act in a way that is without doubt good. And often, as I said at the start, we're often creating institutions that stop or work in the opposite way. In fact, Per Espen, when Per was talking, he was talking about, this sort of modernist worldview. We have separation, reductionism, mechanization, versus a more indigenous worldview of participation, imagination, and animacy. And actually, it's the systems we're creating are driving that separation, that reductionism, that mechanism, that pulling us apart in some ways. They're driving competition rather than enabling cooperation. I'm going to sort of paraphrase a kind of, it's sometimes attributed as a sort of an old parable, and sometimes it's attributed as a sort of modern sort of creation by an American evangelist. Is it George Graham or something like that? About the two wolves. There's two wolves that always, but I'm going to sort of take in a different direction a little bit. Two wolves are always fighting, and one of the wolves is competition and the other is cooperation. So which wolf wins? The one we feed. And I think that can help capture the journey we're on, and help us think about what is it are we feeding? Are we feeding at this global scale the competition or the cooperation? And competition can be very good as well. So, but how do we get the balance? The balance is out of whack. We are primates after all. We should remember that. Jane Goodall, she passed away last week, very sadly, at 91. And of course, she would remind us about this all the time, that we evolved through competition and this balance between competition and cooperation and the sort of evolutionary roots of it. I was lucky enough to meet Jane once at the World Economic Forum. I sat opposite her at a dinner, and she was unbelievably, wonderfully eloquent and humble. But she was clearly sitting in the presence of somebody who is one of the most remarkable people who has ever lived, I think. Yeah, she'll be sorely missed now. But what I think about when I think about Jane's work, is we separated from our common ancestor, the chimpanzees, about 6 million years ago. I mean, and we look at chimpanzee cultures, we're very different. We're able to cooperate at scale. We're able to solve problems. We have the capacity to create, to be super creative in a way. I will say, as a bit of an aside, if I have time, actually, is Jane, for her 90th birthday, someone said to her, "What would you like for your 90th birthday?" And she said, "Dogs." And I was like, "Oh, that's just so right. Yes, of course. Dog. Oh, and you've got you. I saw your dog earlier, Chris, behind you. Um,
Yes, two here.
mine is sitting around quietly here too, and it's so interesting. It's like, yeah, of course. If you're 90, what do you want around you? And why do we want dogs around us? What's going on there? And it did remind me of, you know, there's when we're talking about our ability to cooperate and look back, try to unravel some of the genetics around it. It's a many sort of genetic evolutions that probably gave us this ability to be who we are today at that level. But there was one specific gene mutation called the TKTL mutation, and that happened a few 100,000 years ago. There was like an evolutionary shift, and that mutation allowed more density in our neural networks in the front parts of the brain that helped with, I mean, so we had a very rapid increasing in density and connectivity, and uh, and that seems to have coincided. It's very strongly linked then with our ability, this higher awareness, this ability to cooperate on new levels, this creativity, this intelligence that we have. It's absolutely remarkable. Could that be the kind of like the single gene that gave us this huge shift that separated us out from everyone else? Well, the story gets more complicated because then when we look at how dogs evolved from wolves and became um, more cooperative, better able to adapt to human cultures, become part of our society, our family. What were the key sort of evolutions there? It was the same gene, TKTL1, had the same had some mutations there that also led to domestication of dogs, which I find remarkable. We still don't fully understand all the reasons for this, um, but it's quite interesting, and it's a bit of a segue. Um, so we're the only primate, capable of imagining the future, and our future depends on how we imagine it, on the wolf we feed. Um, E.O. Wilson, he captured this predicament so perfectly. We have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and now we have godlike technologies. And I guess everyone here will be aware of that thinking. And I want to go a little bit deeper into it. With each of these, with our emotions, our institutions, our technologies, we create feedback loops that reinforce them. Some feed competition, some feed cooperation. So, with the Paleolithic emotions, we evolved in a world of genuine scarcity and small groups, sort of maximum 150 people. Um, you know, when they're the feedback loops we have, things like status anxiety, we monitor our position obsessively, and status threat, triggers a physiological response in us. This can drive, very competitive behavior, and can drive, in primates, it can drive quite violent behavior. Um, we've evolved to be able to monitor that behavior in about 150 people. But now social media puts us in a status competition with billions of people. And so the feedback loop is misfiring catastrophically. The second, feedback loop is like us versus them. The tribal identification leads to outgroup threats, perceptions of threats at least, and in-group cohesion. But through competing with them, sort of reinforcing these us versus them boundaries, which then we exploit with our political systems, and we exploit with our technological systems, and scale, blitz scale them. And this scarcity mindset, perceived scarcity, drives hoarding, and that zero-sum thinking, around things. There is enough for everybody on the planet. There is enough for everybody. And then we have some loops that drive, competition. But that requires, coordination. We have reciprocal altruism. If we help somebody, we gain a reputation for that, and we can get preferential treatment as a partner. This creates more opportunities to cooperate. You get feedback loops there. But the key, so there's got that key tension. Our cooperative instincts evolved over smaller groups, not on the scale we're thinking about today. So, so we evolved, us versus them. Now we need that common humanity. Now we're feeling the implications of that. And then on the medieval side of things, we had these great innovations. Medieval, trust at scale without kinship. There's, we've had trust sort of biologically built in through, familial ties and kinship. And suddenly we were able to develop systems that, without that, that could scale, contracts, rule of law, democratic representation, allowed us to cooperate beyond face-to-face groups. They made strangers trustworthy to each other. So this is really quite revolutionary. And then we could cooperate beyond our village, beyond the tribes, to something much larger. But then other institutions also developed that work in the opposite way: property rights, the worldview of the market that is beyond society and beyond the environment. Everything is captured by markets, as Per Espen says. We're atomized, everything is commodified, and set up as a zero-sum game of winners and losers. And this does bring many benefits. I mean, it has driven progress as well. But these loops become, they are reinforcing loops that become very, very destructive. I mean, the most important of the reinforcing loop is, in a winner-takes-all society, is that, these extractive institutions create vested interests. You get political capture. The wealthy become very, very politically powerful. And as they become more and more powerful, they're obviously others become less powerful, and they're you're not able to have any sort of system change. You end up in a sort of in a stasis. Last year, actually, the 3 Nobel laureates in economics, they were awarded the prizes for their work in sort of understanding these kind of power dynamics. Simon Johnson, James Robinson, and Darren Acemoglu, who are brilliant. I really recommend their books on why nations fail and power and progress. They're big insights into how the AI sector today could completely disrupt power structures in the world. And if it's not directed, this will have very, very serious consequences for humanity for a very long time. So the critical insight here is, institutions don't naturally evolve towards being inclusive. They require, constant, political struggle and the ability to evolve. Things are getting much worse today with tech monopolies, with tax havens, with the power structures that don't, very, very unfair, very, very deeply concentrated. And then just sort of checking on time here. So we're good for another few minutes, Chris. Yeah. So here's so how are we going to start thinking about this in a different way? And I want to talk a bit about then the work of Elinor Ostrom. So maybe some of you may be familiar with her work. She was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2009. And the same year as the disastrous Copenhagen climate summit, and the same year as the release of the planetary boundaries, the first planetary boundaries framework. So these are sort of big, big moments, I think. And Lynn Ostrom, she was awarded. She was very surprised to be awarded. She didn't see herself as an economist. She saw herself as a social scientist. And a lot of her work had been looking at the work of there's a famous academic, Garrett Hardin, who was also a racist. Generally had very, very unpleasant views on things, who published a paper on the tragedy of the commons back in 1969. And he saying that we can't all cooperate. It's not in our nature to do that. And Ellen Ostrom spent her entire career overthrowing that, looking at how communities, how indigenous groups and others, fisheries in Maine, forests in Nepal, how these were managed in a way that as a commons, without deep oversight, without a sort of a strict governance structure, and she was looking at, well, why is that? What's happened here that has allowed that to happen? And she developed a series of principles, based on the sort of empirical evidence from all these case studies. What is it that is giving them the ability to manage at quite a considerable scale without sort of authoritarian type rules or mechanisms. And her basically, her insights were like a manual for building trust in societies. So all the principles were about essentially about each one adding up to how you build more and more trust. Eleanor Ostrom, Lynn Ostrom, I had she passed away. She had cancer and died in 2012. But I had the privilege of working with her for the last few years of her life, and even publishing a paper with her, which I was as like a kind of a crazy honor for me. And her work, she set out about 8 principles. She said, you need to set clear boundaries, and really have to understand the state of the resource, and everybody has to understand that. Actually, we have that now with the planetary boundaries framework. For the first time, we have a boundaries for the whole planet, and regular updates on their state. She said that we need collective choice. Those affected participate in making the rules. People have to, we need legitimacy in the rule creation. Everybody who has a stake in the resource has to participate in making the rules. There needs to be regular monitoring and accountability, and graduated sanctions for rule breakers. Strong conflict resolution systems, and a recognition of rights. That is, external authorities, other authorities respect the rights of the community to autonomy, and altogether, as I said, these principles, one by one, they're all about that trust building within the society. And of course, and then she talked about polycentric governance that don't have a single system ruling everything, because it needs flexibility. It needs to be able to, it needs checks and balances. If you have one single governance system, then if power accumulates there, and then you end up with problems you can't resolve because of those power differentials. That's why polycentric governance can work much better. So overlapping layers of governance for that. So it builds transparency. It prevents free riding, and it gives people a collective voice in it. So altogether, I mean, I really recommend looking at her work and the follow-up works on that. But towards the end of her life, she started then trying to apply these principles to the global level, how this would operate at the global level. And we can see, I mean, the systems we have in place today clearly don't do that. I mean, one of the issues is, it's nation states competing with one another, and the sense that this is a zero-sum game, that it's not a common resource. It's everybody has the right to sort of maximum exploitation, which can't work. Um, so. So then Ostrom's work was really a foundational part of the work of Earth for All. Myself and Per Espin, Jayata Ghosh, Sandrine Dixon de Clèves, and others that we published this book back in 2022 now. And in Earth for All, we looked at, well, how do we uh, create societies that can stay within planetary boundaries? How do we build a future that that we have well-being for all within planetary boundaries? And we identified 5 major turnarounds to be able to deliver on that. And the turnarounds we said were the most important for for our long-term future. Were obviously on energy. We need to keep carbon in the ground. Obviously, on our food system and land use, we need to protect the resilience of the biosphere at all costs. This is the most priceless asset on Earth. And then the other 3 are related to poverty, to inequality, and to gender empowerment. And those other 3 are each in their own right absolutely is essential for human progress. But very critically, they're about building trust across the world. So poverty, inequality, gender empowerment, we have to reduce the huge inequalities between nations. We have to find new mechanisms for accelerated development in the global south. We need to address inequality. I mean, we're now at levels of inequality not really seen since the 1920s, which led to an era of fascism and that eventually led to a new social contract in societies to overcome that. And we need that again. We need a new social contract. The inequality is, I think, one of the key reasons that we're lacking the trust across societies, and a massive redistribution of wealth will really help there, and gender empowerment. That is going to be one of the huge drivers of rebuilding trust and having a sense of a common humanity. So those and then within the Earth for All book, then we talk about how to achieve that, what it's going to take to achieve to drive that, and in a sort of technical policy levers that can do it. So maybe I just want to conclude then by taking us back to where we started. Like our default systems are competition. It's harder to create institutions for cooperation than competition. Our technological platforms we're creating, while they start off with very good intentions, or we're going to create, connect the world and make us one big happy family, the business models and all the incentives are about competition. Who employs the most economists in the world in the private sector? It's Amazon. It's like these tech platforms are employing huge number of economists, etc. And it's about that. Are they designing things for cooperation or something else? So I say we need to design systems following Ostrom's principles. We need to build transparency so cooperation is visible. We need to ensure everybody's voice is heard, which means also moving beyond the sort of nation state as the sort of default sort of governance system globally. and we need to create, fairness, so that the trust is absolutely rational. Um, so uh, so I think we either build systems. I think our goal isn't, perhaps the biggest challenge in the world today isn't solving climate change or the biodiversity crisis. It is solving for this common humanity, and building trust. I think if we do that, everything else will follow. And I'll stop there and hand over to Chris, and thank you all for hopefully staying awake.
Thank you, Owen. Um, there are so many things. I've got 2 pages of notes and questions I want to do, but I'm not going to dive into them because we're going to break out. So this could be both like a minute for a bio break if anybody needs to go take a pee or whatever, and then we'll come into the groups and we'll be in triads for about 7, 8 minutes. So this is a good time to practice cooperation and self-governance. So everybody does 2 minutes each. And your revelations, observations, questions, and then we'll come back together and share some more time with Owen. Rich, you want to move us forward?
I'm on it. The magic is happening right now.
I can't wait to see who I'm with.
Well,
Marcy, it's you.
we apparently are internet matched.
We are meant to talk to each other. I
Yeah.
love it. And I'm the worst person because I'm so focused on like running the meeting. It's like I've got all the background stuff, but we can introduce ourselves to Cynthia.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey there.
Oh, I'm in the breakout. Am I in a breakout room right now?
Yeah, Cynthia, we
Okay.
just broke out into triads, and the idea is that we share our learnings and then jump back in, and then one of us, oh, we just lost her. Hold on. Oh, Dave is, sorry, I've got people everywhere. Hold on. See, this is the challenge, my good friend Marcy. I've got people sending me notes still.
Oh, I can't truly imagine. It's brain warping to me.
It
Thank you
is.
for doing this.
Oh, it's an honor to do it. And I've got to push Dave into a room. I just got a message. Move to room. I'm gonna stick him in room. I'd bring him into our room, but I don't see us. Now this I've never done. Okay. Oh, we lost her. Well, Marcy, I do want to participate in this. So I have some thoughts on this. Would you like to go first?
No, no, please proceed.
It's interesting, and I don't know if I'd share this in the group, but it's this one of my lessons, and the reason I reached out to like Pachamama Alliance, and one of my learnings of going and traveling into Ecuador, and like smelling and feeling, the impact of climate change. One of my lessons, and having worked at Patagonia, that was like funding climate change action for years and years and years, and failing in so many ways. I think they would say that, it's very rare that they can apply a dollar to something and have an outcome happen that they were hoping for. Is that it is so important to understand the specifics and to have that educational, to have that very researched understanding of climate change. And this is not a positive comment, but it's not inspirational. It doesn't connect with the soul.
Mhm.
It is the foundation that is required, but and he is such a lovely human. And I was able to talk to, him before the call, but it's that storytelling ability of people that work from spirit and that live in those places. And that is the reality. Um, that is so important. It's not just the science. And I found myself drifting. And so it's not the most positive experience. I think his stories and the shares were just so beautiful, but I'm missing the connection to my soul of inspiration and passion.
There's a quote by Rilke. I love Rilke. And he's a romantic and he's passionate. And people find him sometimes too much. But oh
Right.
my, everything comes from a Germanic romantic place that I really appreciate. And he talks about preserving the stored humanity of place in the stories. And wherever place is, whether it's the multiverse, whether it's 500 million years ago, whether it's at that moment that the great gasp rose out of the sea,
Yeah.
I mean, those are hugely romantic in terms of they're erotic to me. Some things came together across whatever we would call all time. And created these bonds that then produce more and more and more desire and more seeking and more magnetism. And when I think about that, Chris talked about in the meditation, the beautiful Sistine Chapel, the reaching across all time between humanity and whatever is more than greater than human, which is part of the inspiration. It is
Yeah.
the inspiriting. I I I get goosebumps and then I need to pause. I need some spaciousness around it. And isn't that what stories are?
Yeah.
The more universal, the more personal it is, the more universal it can feel to others. How do we do that with these universalities and make them more intimate and feeling more personal to each of us?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's taking that knowledge that's being shared today and that
Uh-huh.
foundational thing and then interpreting it into that place of spirit and inspiration, right? And it's Chris and I spent a lot of time talking about, science, art, and spirit and how like all three are so and I feel like this thing is that the foundational part of the science, which is so important. Um,
I think so. I think that if it was a script exactly as Owen spoke it,
mhm.
and it was given to Helen Mirren, or we could think of any number of performers, Bonham Carter, just we can think of many. I would make it a woman, Mother
Yes,
Earth or the Great Universe or whatever that is, and let them perform it in 2 hours with a break
right.
in between, we'd all be weeping.
Yes, we would.
Hmm.
Mm.
You know what? I'm looking over your shoulder and you have a portrait of my favorite creature on the planet.
The
Fox.
fox.
Yes.
That's my sly fox. And
Oh,
there's a fox, and that's the fox
oh yeah, riding a
and the
bike.
hair. It's a little fuzzy, I
Yeah.
apologize, but
That,
it's
that's great. They are the spirit animal here at Wiseacre. Yeah.
oh no.
So I was
Mine is the Roadrunner, by the way, which I'll share that story
thinking,
with you. Yeah.
yeah,
So
that sounds
yeah.
speedy.
And reminding me to pay attention.
Ah, yeah, don't get hit, right?
Exactly.
Watch where you're running.
Oh,
Um,
exactly.
I want to pause here and say that so provocative to me is this humans are good.
Hmm.
I feel so much lost in our contemporary world around that one. I don't like it. I
Oh,
don't
interesting.
like what comes up for me. Really? Or now? Or You know,
Right.
I don't like that. And yet I think of what true cynicism was as a practice, and that is the only way to love humans is to understand their flaws and not have expectations beyond abilities, you know, and so I have to coach myself around that. And I wish that wasn't true.
Mm. What a controversy. I mean, it's like almost seems controversial, but I totally hear you. Yeah, I feel that conversation.
I mean, it feels like what he's talking about, these great shifts, these great cultural anthropological shifts are, you know, he spoke beautifully about the adjustments of those three major pieces, the time frames, and I need to review them within myself, like rings in a tree.
Mm.
Emotional, then technology, and then godlike systems and institutions.
Right. Wow. Cynthia, we lost you.
I just popped out of my group on accident. I went to the bathroom, then I came back. I was here, but then it said join this other group, and I'm not super Zoom, you know, competent. So yeah, I'm back.
Oh, it's great to see you. Teal, it's great to see you. It's
Thanks.
been a
This
while.
the same thing happened to me. It's great to see you as well, Rich. I
Mhm.
was just chatting with Isabella and Chris, and then all of a sudden I'm here with all of you.
You know, and I'm the worst person to be in a room with because I'm getting hit with all the back end management stuff. So, oh, well, it's fun catching up with Marcy. Oh,
Hi,
Alison,
Marcy.
Hey, Andrew, Alison,
We came back.
Rich, hello, everybody. And
beautiful
Rodrigo.
people.
The bear
So,
people.
It's still such short time. Alison and I were like just in the middle of a thing, and then it's like, oh, we're out.
I know.
I can't speak for every group, but I know our group was in the middle of it too. But I would love to hear either the things that you were in the middle of or what you were about to question or about to say. It is an open field.
I'll jump in. I'm from Asheville, North Carolina, where I'm a Helene survivor, and we talked about community rallying from the mirror in the morning, like I got this, and then to the street, and then to the town, and then to the connected towns. Everyone in this 17 county region knew what to do, and it really was breakthrough optimism. And I could go on and on about it, but bless us all. Thanks.
Wow.
And thanks for the meditation, including plankton. That really resonates.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. Something that Owen said was that, we're in this place where we as humans have this kind of free will, this ability to choose any possibility. And what we're choosing right now is that everyone has a right to maximum exploitation, and it doesn't work. That's what Owen said. But so, like, how do we prove that it doesn't work? How do we demonstrate over and over? I love this idea of the planetary boundaries. And we were talking in our group about Andrew's artwork on planetary boundaries, just sort of showing diagrams of how close to the edge we are on all of these different vectors. That maximum exploitation is a choice that is being taken by countries and individuals. How do we show, I guess that's the challenge that I'm exploring. It doesn't work. We know it doesn't work. What are the demonstrable places? What can we do to show and prove that it doesn't work? In the short term, it can be very satisfying, but in the long term, it doesn't. And why do we have all these sad billionaires who have exploited things? Like, it just seems like such a contradiction to have a sad billionaire trying to make more money.
Well, I'd like to jump in and share that in our group we were talking about how sometimes there's this sense of overwhelm that comes from looking at the zoomed out big picture. And I think, you know, when we're in that space, there's a certain amount of paralysis that happens because we don't always know what the best next step is. And I always think that the most reasonable solutions when it comes to us within our individual lives in the very short period of time that each of us has here, going back into our local level. How are we showing up within our families, within our communities, and how are we building trust at that level? That's what ultimately leads to this paradigm shift of moving from that competition into a place of cooperation. And we talked about trust building a little bit too. How do we do that if the collective trust has been so radically broken as a result of these disillusioned systems we're participating in? And I think trust gets rebuilt through deep listening on an individual level, which takes time, And so there's an urgency, and yet at the same time, we have to take the time. And that's one of the greatest paradoxes that I see us facing right now.
I want to add a little bit because although I totally believe that it takes time and, of course, deep relationships, I also think there is just this magical alchemical thing that happens when there's deep listening and when there's a container, and people who have never felt it immediately go, "What just happened? Why do I feel like I've known you forever?" And so actually, there's also the other end of that where if we build these contexts of small relational collectives that give people the practice and the muscle memory comes in after a while, it doesn't actually take that long to go, wait, this could just happen over there too, and over there too. And I do think there is this kind of non-linear amplification of these things if we allow it. The problem is we think, oh no, only in my community does that work, or only in my network do we talk this way, and we have listening practices and so on. And so we don't have that larger hope or trust that all humans could be doing this together kind of thing, I think is part of it as well.
I have something about this that, you know, it may be controversial, but I decided to do it years ago. And that was to turn the phrase, earn my trust on its head and say that, no, I go around the planet and everyone has my trust and they can lose it. But no one has to put any energy into earning my trust. Who the hell am I? You got it right away. And I think you know, there's people who have been harmed in various ways that would say they learned not to do that, but that seemed to be the most fractal way I could engender it or apply it in my own life.
So that's a comment on that. And first in our group, I learned a lot more about the blockchain nature currency that Rebecca is doing down in Ecuador. But there's an interesting study about oxytocin that proves that it's supposed to be the us drug, but it's also the them drug. It actually regulates empathy rather than simply creating it. It makes outgroups more out-like, which means that that's kind of fast thinking, that we just sort of do it. And therefore, we totally need a meditation like Chris's in order to sort of jam something into the spokes and keep that instinctual, oh, that's not one of us, that's not one of my people, or that is one of my people, sort from happening immediately. It just sort of opens it out into us every time. And I think without a deliberate meditation like Chris does, that we're not going to get there.
Rich brought up in our duet storying and the power of stories and the inspiration, the inspiriting of stories, and how the most personal stories can become the most universal. And in hearing Owen thinking about these multiversal stories, how do we make them intimate and personal? And in my community, and I hope to share this with you all here in the future, we are working on the concept of villages of vision. And that Owen pointed out a very important anthropological point, and that is we are pretty much designed to live with 150 people or less. And probably he didn't say this, but I think also we know that we learn best in a 5-mile radius. We learn from our place spirit. And I live in a very rural mountain community that's made up of villages. And so for the last almost 50 years, I and a group that has expanded out into international sharing and apprenticeships have been working with the concept of polycentric governance and community arts for advocacy and finding the ways to bring our indigenous Euro-American forms of historic celebration and ritual and rites of passage, and bringing living legacies from the elders whom I spent time with in the 70s in this community. And so I'm feeling a very strong pull to really bring forth with you all the concept of working in place, because I believe it was Alan who said, we don't think about that. We think of this huge global concern, and then we have this gridlock that happens within us as creatures. The story, the story, the story, the story. We are born storying. And so I'm very interested now in, and thank you, Owen, for so many ways you've pointed out from the meta view how these things affect us individually. Now the concept is, how do we put them in place and how do we keep them there?
Bravo. Anyone else?
Yes.
Rodrigo.
Hey, Chris, thank you for these meetings. They're amazing. And thanks, Owen. And the summary that we had the opportunity to meet in number 8 with Catherine and Pat's not the maker. And we are just want to share our mutual excitement about the project that somebody mentioned already about the joint projects that we're doing with all the group that the Watershed Embassy is embracing in Maquipucuna in Ecuador, and all the circular economy and all the good things and the synchronicity of these uh, of these people and what is happening to us in the last few years. And I think to finish my idea, because Catherine had to leave, because we need to keep sharing this to practical projects that we have, real projects with the world. And hearing about these billionaires and all that, I think the more that they listen to good things, the more they are willing to share, to join, and I think that's the optimism that we want to share. Thank you.
Nice.
Gracias, Rodrigo.
I'll jump in. I was thinking about this from a little bit of a different slant, which is that of like how we relate through business. So if you think about business as a way of relating, like it's, I have something, you need it, or we're going to transact, we're going to interact, right, in a certain way. We've learned a very specific way to do that. And that way, for all intents and purposes, wouldn't call it like high trust. You know, we have contracts and we have liability insurance. And like, if you just look at the way our society, you know, at least in the West, is set up, it's to manage for mistrust, right? And what kind of pulled me in when Owen was sharing was how we scale trust in the next generation of the way we transact as a globe. Marcy's given us a really solid perspective at the community level. And then there's layers of the way we interact, whether it's through our community or our state, our country, or our globe. And I'm curious, and I think this is my generation's question, as a younger person. It's like, how do we re-architect systems of relating, whether it's through business or other ways that are designed to inherently create trust, promote cooperation. And yeah, I feel inspired by that question. I mean, and Alan shared, I don't know if, or excuse me, Drew. Drew and I were in the breakout room, and he shared how everyone knew what to do when there was a crisis. And the question becomes, how do we inspire everyone to know what to do all the time? Moving from the crisis, like fight or flight response that sort of catalyzes, to that is a constant state of being, a constant way of living, a new paradigm. And anyway, this was really powerful for me, and I just thank you all so much for what you shared.
I was gonna, that was exactly what animated our beginning of our group discussion, was what are the mechanisms of trust and how can we actually design for them? Or at least that was my question as a psychologist, and especially a developmental psychologist, where I care about young people's context. And of course, a lot of that is in digital context, but there's others in that hybrid space. And I think, going back to Owen's point, we actually know all of this. We've got about 100 years of research in psychology and sociology that says exactly the way to socially engineer trust in a way that's beautiful and easy. And so we actually know how to do it. We're just not doing it because it's not about making money. And so there are ways of, making metrics that deepen our understanding or make us see each other and see our commonality. And there's all sorts of ways that are very low hanging fruit. We're just not doing them right now, but they are there, and they're not mysterious. And there are things that we've been studying for a long, long time, as well as wisdom traditions who have been holding this wisdom for, thousands of years. But we even have science around it that would be very straightforward to kind of engineer these kinds of high trust contexts that become amplified over scales. And talking about fractals that Chris talks about, I think we can do it. It's just getting people interested in doing it.
Isabella, are you auditioning to be our next presenter?
Yeah. I was not. No.
Boy,
I'm very happy to share
for a minute there. Yeah.
Eventually.
I would love to chime in, because what Isabella and Alex are talking on is, I think, so critical, because it describes it lays out the next steps for all of us. Like, we already know how to do this, so let's just start doing it. I mean, that's kind of what I feel. Something I was thinking about when Alex was describing all these systems that we have in place that perpetuate this sentiment of distrust. And we've kind of like gone down a really deep rabbit hole, especially when it comes to contracts and the legalese and the inaccessibility to really like understand what everybody is trying to actually say to each other. I just went through this experience 2 days ago, so I think it's relevant. We have some new tenants who are going to be moving into our house, renting for the winter. And I've been using this template for our contract for renters that was passed to me by my mom. And it's a template that she repurposed from somebody. And as I wade through it and try to customize it for tenants, I've found it to be this incredibly laborious task because it's like 6 pages and I barely even understand what the contract is saying. But I've been using it for a couple of years now. And when I sat down to look at it this time around, I ran it by my partner and I was like, this just seems way too burdensome. And so we took it and we ran it actually through AI and said, please make us a contract that's more like comprehensive using this information. And what got spit out was just layman's language that was very reasonable. And so we just revamped the whole contract, pared it down to 2 pages, and it pretty much says, please don't damage our property. Please don't break any laws. This is what the rent costs. Sign if you agree to this and let us know if you have any questions, and we'd love to walk you through any systems that you don't understand. And it was like language that I have available to me that I needed AI to somehow spit out because I'd gotten so far away from just recognizing that this already lives inside of me. But it was like such a moment for me of saying, oh, if we want to build this trust, let's just do it. Let's just do it now. I mean, who says we have to keep using these old systems if we're not even in alignment with them?
Well, I think that's amazing. And I think that's the power of story. So if we have these solutions already, that's where like science communication comes in for translating complex scientific ideas to people who can understand them, who aren't experts in that domain, and then they can take action on it. And so maybe, Isabella, if there are things that are real practices that come from history, maybe we just need to storyify them in some way, make them more accessible. Because right now it's so confusing. If there was something that people could focus on, I think that this is where story becomes really critical.
I mean, if you listen to any Indigenous person right now on any podcast, they will give you stories that are thousands years old of why greed sucks, why being individually minded is the most terrible thing and you will be wiped out, etc. They have the stories in like huge multitudes. And yeah, I think we can amplify them for sure, but we don't have to remake them,
Owen said, and he started to speak about his sons, and he said something that's so moving to me. We have a responsibility to be optimistic for our children and their futures. Right there. That's a virtue. That's a story. That's a manifesto. That's a motto. And we don't have these anymore. The banners, the standards, the high standards that clans and communities, families, and organizations used to live by. Mission statements are just wobbly and flaccid. But manifestos like that, you can hear, and Owen, it was so clear, if you're still there, you utterly mean that from your bones. And your sons are major parts of your story and our story because of that. I don't have biological children, but boy, am I a parent. And you've reminded me of my responsibility and my accountability. There is no question about that story to me.
Amen.
I want to, there's so much amazing stuff. There's quite a lot of things I want to share, but there's just 2 things I think that the last few points have really triggered for me, and especially one of what you were just saying, Marcy. So just maybe specifically around that and what Dave was saying about the story in part. So I worked for Shell, the energy company, for 14 years and left recently. One of the reasons that our previous CEO turned the company towards renewable energy, and we went on this 10-year journey of building out renewable energy inside Shell, was because the CEO's daughter came to him one day at the age of 6 years old, and this is based in the Netherlands. And in the Netherlands, they were very much against Shell at a government level. And the 6-year-old daughter of the CEO of Shell said to her, "Daddy, at school, everybody's been telling me you're evil. And that sent him on a 10-year journey of implementing, of course, getting buy-in of shareholders, getting, you know, of course, all of that. But he was so committed to it that he shifted this literal oil tanker on a 10-year course, which would then shift many other things. Now, that whole thing died because he was ousted, and the new CEO didn't have that level of moral responsibility and was much more focused on shareholder value. But I just want to reiterate what I'm hearing here is actually resonates so much to me from this whole experience that I had inside Shell. The second thing I quickly want to say is I really liked the framing you said, Owen, of the Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, godlike technologies. And in our group with Alison and Cynthia, we were kind of referring to like the deep listening at all those levels, deep listening to the earth, deep listening to ourselves, deep listening to others. And I've had this kind of thought in my head for a very long time that our culture and society today spends way more time advancing our external technology than it does advancing our internal technology. And I think the Irresistible Wisdom Network is definitely helping to do the advancement of our internal technology.
We're coming to the bottom of the hour, and we do keep that somewhat firm. I know we can go for probably another hour. I know I could. I still have many things I haven't brought up, but Owen, I want to thank you so much for spending your evening with us. I want to thank you so much for the powerful impression that you made on me and my my life and my epistemology, my way of knowing what I know. I look at the faces on the screen in front of me and I am absolutely enthused because each one of you is a seed, and seeds grow. And I have every confidence that each one of you could impact 2, 5, 10, 30 people. And then in turn, how that goes. We've got some incredible storytellers here, Isabella and Dave, and literally all of you. Rodrigo and Rebecca are in the midst of a revolutionary project down in Ecuador. And I'm not sure how to facilitate the continued conversation. This is a question to the group before we sign off, and that is, you know, it's like every week there's a different group of people here, so I'm not going to make a different WhatsApp group for everybody. Maybe there's solutions out there, most likely that everyone knows how to participate in, but I would love to have a way to continue these things. So Owen, if he agrees, is accessible, and you all are accessible to each other. So if you write it in the chat, Rich will collect it and it'll be real. But unless anybody's got a great closing phrase, we're coming to the end of this one. There was a number of new people here this week. I hope this was a great experience for you. I appreciated seeing you here on my screen. And I'll let you know about next month. And I don't know if anybody have any moment of genius.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the invitation. It's been an honor to be able to have these conversations. I think that they're so important. And yes, and please do get in touch if you have any thoughts on it. Absolutely happy to discuss with everybody. So thank you again.
Great, thank you, Owen. Okay, well, lovely to see you all. Thank you. With good fortune on our side, I'll see you all next month or sooner.
Okay, thank you, Chris.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Chris. Bye
Thanks,
all.
Chris.
Bye-bye, everybody.